Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Corn Office Podcast, and I'm your host, Jay. This podcast is brought to you by Connectix. And Connectix helps businesses operate by providing smart business support. So we connect companies with top tier virtual support that delivers exceptional results at a fraction of a traditional cost. But let's go back to the podcast. So, in the Corn Office podcast, we explore the minds behind the successful small, medium, and large size businesses who are being led by the founders themselves. And trust me, it said only 1% of everyone alive is lucky enough to be leading their own ventures. So, not each and every one of us are lucky enough to take on that challenge. So, joining with us on today's podcast is the CEO and the founder of the software company, Knocen. Welcome on the show, Marcus Lucas, the CEO and the founder of Knocen.
Jay, thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.
Lovely having you as well. So I know bits and pieces about you, some emails that we've had and the chats that we've had, but let's break dice. Let's say who you are, what you do, and what.
Sounds good. Marcus Lucas, founder and CEO of Knocen. Um, we are a software company that's coming to market where it's an all-in-one management solution that bridges the gap between construction, assets, work orders, financial management, and all linking them together through what we call knowledge management, right? So that's where the Knocen comes into play. Um, so, you know, I've been in construction and facilities for 20 years and decided to take this leap. And I'm excited to be here talking with you and to bring what we do to the world, to your viewers. Appreciate it.
Appreciate having you as well. And as the name of our podcast goes, the Corn Office. The Corn Office is being held by the C-suite, the person who led the company and the person who has the mindset to make a difference. And you, Marcus, is a person who made quite a difference because you've been in the industry for 20 years and you decided to pivot, but rather understanding the pain points of the industry. So, what made you start this new venture?
And so, I've done a lot of jobs being a program manager for large construction organizations. I've run operations and maintenance for higher ed. And the one thing I saw that was consistent across the board, no matter who the organization was, is just the lack of collaboration between those who build and those who maintain. The inability to effectively access institutional knowledge, right? And just how much is lost over the time when you have these great new assets with so many millions of dollars being spent. And then the information that's supposed to travel just doesn't, right? And ultimately you have decisions that are made in silos. So for me, I just wanted to take what I've learned, take what my friends and colleagues have all shared about their pain points and try to do something about it.
Are we right? You see, it's a collective hub of knowledge and your palm that's going to be impactful for your construction management.
That's essentially, the key. We don't want to make it too technical. That's not what we are. It's all about, how do we create a seamless transfer of accountability, if you will, but also the critical knowledge and infrastructure or data that needs to traverse from the design all the way to 20 years down the line when you're thinking about replacing a piece of equipment. How do we ensure that information is easily accessible, right? And the only way you do that is by creating a single platform where you can track and manage each aspect of the life cycle of a project, right? A lot of the industry out there, you have specific siloed pieces of equipment or software that does this, and they do it great. There's a lot of great products in the market, but they do what they do. They do this, or they do this, or they do work orders, or they do construction management. And then the question always comes, how does it integrate? And most of the time it doesn't, right? Or you have to spend thousands of dollars just to try to create one API or a connection to something else. And, that is cumbersome and expensive for a lot of organizations when, you know, why not just have it in one place?
It does. And essentially, now that you spoke about it, a lot of integrations. Some softwares actually look like the back of your computer where all the wires are entangled. You don't know which is leading to which. And that itself is a huge mess. And I believe Notion is solving that.
That's the goal. I mean, that's what we do. We wanted to be user friendly. We wanted to be flexible. We wanted to be uh, ready for your growth and your expanded portfolio, but also, you know, have the ability to reach even those down to your contractors, your subcontractors, your individual users who may be not as technology advanced, right? And they're still struggling with their cell phones. But they're out there and they're phenomenal workers who are able to do the electrical, do the plumbing, but technology is not their strong suit, right? So we still can't avoid where the future is going and how technology is impacting us, but it should be simple and it should be able to reach all aspects of the industry, not just those who are comfortable with the tech.
Got it. Got it. So let them do what they do best and let us take care of the groundwork.
Let's say that. But also let's make sure that, what they did 3 years ago is not lost,
And
right? It's so oftentimes, we do work, we do phenomenal work. And the individual who may have done it is no longer with the company anymore or has retired. All right. Or that information was lost in their desk on a piece of paper or in somebody's share drive. Right. And so the institutional knowledge, I believe, is one of the most valuable resources that any organization can have. Right. But that's where the knowledge management comes in. How do you acquire? Right. How do you validate? How do you organize? How do you update? Right. And how do you reuse? Right. And so there should be no difference in how a maintenance program or construction program operates. The same way. How do we get that information and how do we make it useful for those who actually need it and not just as a checkbox on somebody's checklist, right? How do we truly bring a real life application to, valuing the information that we worked really hard to pay them money for?
yes, yes. And I know, love your three ploy update, validate, and maintain. And love the three ploy of as to what Notion is built on. And all the products that come into the market are brilliant. Notion is going to be the same. But you being a founder and you being in the industry for over 20 years, what frustration led to you to build this Notion itself?
Yeah, just that. I mean, one of my last consultancy jobs that I was taking, we do construction turnover management. That's part of what we do in the industry, where we try to sit in that gap as a person, right? As a process, to take this new asset and how do we ensure that everything that needs to be turned over, whether it's your O&M manuals, your warranty documents, your as-built drawings, even your training videos, right? How do we ensure that not only that stuff happens the way it's supposed to happen based on contracts, but how do we make sure that it ultimately gets to the right people, right? And if you look and do just a little bit of research, you'll see that this plagues the industry. That closeout turnover just plagues the industry considerably. So sitting in that role trying to help my clients, I realized that I was sitting at my desk, right? And I was taking pictures of punch lists with my phone, coming back to my desk, opening up an Excel spreadsheet, typing the issue in, right? Linking a file to my OneDrive and emailing it off, right? And I was like, there's got to be a more efficient way to do this, right? And there's no difference than when I was getting closeout documentation. Somebody was coming to me, handing me a flash drive, saying, "Here are all your O&M manuals. Here are your warranties." Okay, one day I lost the flash drive, right? So it's like, okay, now I'm asking 6 months later for it, and so I saw and I sat in this, I'm like, I'm a consultant that's supposed to be really doing really well at this job, right? This is supposed to be my expertise. And I'm struggling with time management just to track all this stuff down because of the inefficiencies, and not being able to leverage technology. And so when I searched, um, there was a lot of great softwares out there, but none of them focused on what that turnover and closeout piece that I could find. And so that's where it kind of started. I just wanted to create a bridge software that allowed accountability, right, into that turnover and closeout process. And from there, That was 6 months in. We're 2.5 years later, and it's just expanded to, well, if we're going to do closeout and turnover, why don't we also manage the construction? If we're going to manage the construction, why don't we also tie it to asset management? If we're going to tie it to asset management, well, we definitely need a work order side of it as well. And so it just kind of expanded and grew to try to be an all-inclusive and comprehensive software that can not only do what I was consulted to do, but to support the whole entire organization beyond just me, so they can do what they do best, right? And that's bring these new assets to life for their intended purpose.
Essentially, it is the simple story of a flash drive and an Excel led to you branching out to multiple pain points that a GC would essentially face in, as you said, played in the industry.
And not just
As
GCs, owners are as well, right? So the owners want accountability. End users, want to be able to you know, use the facilities, and not have downtime and, not have things that are broken for too long, because that's not what they do, right? Whether it's a school and they're teaching, or whether it's an apartment building and people are living and enjoying time with family, it doesn't matter. They just don't want things to be broken. And when things happen, they want a quick turnaround. And so, this impacts, the life cycle of a property impacts so many people, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people over the life cycle of a 30-year building. And, it's bigger than just, those who build.
it is, and this kind of leads me to it partially answers the question itself, because I was actually going to ask, which hat do you prefer? Is it the hat of a consultant, which you've been wearing for the past 20 years, or the hat of a software founder, which you've been wearing for the last couple of years?
This definitely is tough for a founder, right? Even now, because I'm so ingrained in what I do day to day, I don't have a large team, I'm still a small business. And so even having one-on-one conversations with potential clients, hearing their challenges, hearing some of their problems. And because this is what we do, and this is kind of, what I've decided to bring to the market, I'm able to be flexible, right? It's not this software, this is what it does, and it's going to cost you millions of dollars to add something different. No, let's work together, right? How do I make my software our software and allow you to have input into what are the outputs that you even want to see? We have a foundation, and we believe in it, and it's strong. But me being a founder, so I can make the decision that you, Jay, you come to me and says, Marcus, why can't it do this? It can't do it today, but we can, as long as it integrates, as long as it kind of flows within the structure of what Knocen does, you know, I can do that for you. Let's be flexible, and let's bring this thing to life together.
Exactly. And there are some lovely phrases that you're sharing. It's not my software, it's our software. Because most of the proprietary software that are out there, it's either use it or change how you work. You challenge the norm, you challenge the people that have been doing that for the past 20 odd years and say, no, this is how we're going to work. And that's not how it should work, essentially.
Yeah. So for me, it was important. I mean, I approach this from a standpoint of, I'm not a software engineer,
Yeah.
right? I'm a person who's done this work, who's been there and needed something, a product or a system that allowed me to be more efficient and more effective. And I believe that there are a lot of others like me who who don't have a whole lot of time to sit behind a desk, right? They're out in the field, right? They're managing contractors. They're working with their hands, they're fixing things, and it's got to be simple, right? And ultimately, that's what this is all about. It's about how do we become more effective and more efficient with people who actually are out there in the field, bringing these beautiful pieces of equipment and these beautiful assets to life, and that's important.
It is important, as because you need to know their pain points. And as a leader, you need to know where your team stands. And which brings me to the next question as well. Wearing both these hats, how has that affected your leadership traits, and what leadership traits have you nurtured during that particular period of time, which has made you stronger?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny that you asked that, right? Oh, it's kind of cliche, but there's so much that I don't know. And you know, for me, I always believed that having a strong team, and then empowering the team was a foundational principle of a good leader, right? That's always been with me. Um, but as I've transitioned from the consultant into the founder, right, I'm still trying to figure out, how do I bring what I do best to people who are smarter than me, right? To people who are more technically advanced than me? Because I am in the software, so I'm having to rely on people who have skill sets and talking languages. So sometimes I don't even understand, right? And so, but I don't want to not be involved. It can't be like, okay, cool, I'm hiring a great person, do what you do best, I'm gonna leave you alone. It's, you're a great person, do what you do best, but how do I take the time to get involved with you as a person and your experience? Because in order for me to know who you are and know what you do, then my skill set of being strategic, my skill set of being organized, my skill set in some ways of being a visionary, my skill set of becoming more efficient and strategic can now help you to maybe navigate some of the problems that you have in your own work, even though it may not be a foundational problem, but it can help us grow collectively. Right. And so for me, it's about not only taking the time to understand what I don't know, but taking the time to get to know my team and those who are doing the work so I can be helpful to them in my own way. Right. And that was very important. It's something I've definitely had to learn over the last 2 years.
And as you clearly put out there, a leader should not only see the best in himself and the business, but the team as well, because at the end of the day, any business is people's business. So the way you
Yes,
manage people will essentially be the way how and well your product, whatever it is, would succeed.
that's right. That's, I mean, I really do the same thing, so I truly believe that culture of an organization starts with the leader, right? And so if I want to build a culture that's empowering, inclusive, that's a learning based organization, one that's flexible, right? Then that's kind of got who I have to be to my team. And so what we deliver, which is our product and our software and our services, can that can kind of come through the genetic, infrastructure of what's coming to market, right? It's got to be able to shine through. And so, but it starts with me.
It essentially is, and then in this era where and when things are just changing in the wink of an eye, because the news that you see a couple of hours back would be old compared to the news that you see a couple of hours later on. And obviously, you need to pivot. And being a technology company, the leader has to adopt and embrace that ideology as well. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, correct. 100%. 100%.
And on that notion, what has been the biggest surprise in shifting from construction to leading a tech development team? Because
The
shifting
biggest,
you, I would say,
oh, this is the biggest surprise. Hmm. The biggest surprise is how much things cost. Yeah. As a consultant, I mean, and I mean it in a real way, your bottom line, we're in this business, all of us to make an impact, of course, but we got to be profitable at the end of the day. And so as a consultant, it's a lot easier to operate, in the black, right? Because it's manpower, right? Even with this myself, I can go out there and I can work several hours and support clients. The hourly rate is going to be whatever the hour rate is, and my back office costs are not very high. You come into a tech firm and that completely changes, from your developers, your tech folks, whether it's getting into marketing and sales and administrative and then all the subsequent software and applications that you need from phone services, you name it. It's just costs are constantly growing. And, that has been a major difference in surprise. I shouldn't have been too surprised, but I was, as to, taking on an initiative like this and the difference in how cash flow works, from a consulting firm to ultimately a tech firm.
it essentially is. And how have you tackled this challenge? I would say tackling this challenge would essentially be the question.
As a CEO, and I think any leaders who will potentially, listen to your podcasts, you got to leverage all forms of resources, right? And sometimes it starts with yourself and how much money that you are actually willing and able to put back into your business. So definitely even up until a couple months ago, I work as a consultant and that money goes to pay for a lot of the things that I'm doing on the software side, so ultimately doubling up, my roles and responsibilities. Obviously, leveraging lines of credit, at some point going to the market for investments, right? So, you tackle it however you can. And, but that's one of the more important parts of being a leader of one of these firms. It's understanding, what you can do versus what you can't do at what time you can do it based on your resources. And how do you know if maybe this is the right time to go for investment, right? That's some intuition and some guidance and conversations you need to have with your support circle and your mentors to determine whether or not percentages and what that raise looks like. It all is a big smorgasbord of information coming in so that ultimately you can make the best decision going out.
Yeah, the best decision going out. And you're truly passionate about Knocen. So coming back to Knocen and how your leadership has nurtured and pruned the product, how do you think Notion, when it takes off, how do you think it might change how buildings are managed? I would say, let's say 5 years from now, and what gets you personally excited about Notion and what it could mean for the industry?
Man, so a great question. When I started to go down this path, and I kind of did it a little bit backwards, right? Everybody says, when you're doing something like this, you go and validate the market, right? Then you build. But with me, I had 20 years of experience. I know the problems. Then I'm my own validation, and maybe that might be a little arrogant, but I felt really, really confident that I knew what the issues were. And then once I started, I went and did my research, right? And I was able to come across a NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology article from the 2000s um, that referenced a phenomenal number. $15.8 billion dollars in the U.S. is lost annually because of the lack of operability between the construction sector and the operations sector. $15.8 billion dollars, that's in the U.S. alone, right? So this is something that plagues, the worldwide community. And so for me, one of my biggest beliefs and hopes are that Nosen can help my clients recoup their portion of those losses, right? By it's interoperability between these two is the problem. Okay, we can save money, save resources by bringing everybody together, being more, comprehensive in how we approach problems together, and then reallocate those savings back into the real estate asset for those who live, work, and socialize in them, right? When you're not having to rework, when you're not having to reorder things, where you're not having to spend hours trying to recreate a document or hours to have somebody come out and walk a building because they can't access the asset, your as-built drawings. When you save time and money, that money can then be reallocated, right? And so when you look at a number like $15.8 billion dollars in the US alone, that is considerable amount of resource that can be put back to where it's more valuable and not just going out into the ether. And so I'm excited about the idea of Nosen being able to support our clients in recouping their portion of that.
Recouping it is, and to put the numbers into perspective, 15.8 billion, that's even larger than certain third world countries' entire GDP. So, and that essentially itself is only through inefficiencies.
Correct. You got it. You got it.
Yeah, so two, three countries would have fallen annually when you actually account
Annual.
the numbers in. Yes, yeah. And wow, so, I don't think you need any more validation. Just that article and just the number itself is more than enough for you to start on this and roll it out.
Yeah, but it's about acceptance as well. A lot of what I believe a lot of what I have to do moving forward is educating a little bit. There are people who live and breathe this work every day, but they're so used to the inefficiencies that it's almost like, it's hard to put a quantifiable number to something that people have lived with for decades, right? And so it's about how do we, bring qualitative analysis in a very, clear way where we're speaking clearly and saying, listen, when I talk to you, you know exactly what I'm saying. You've had to search, you know, in some file cabinet for drawings from 1980, right? You lived that, right? How best would it have been if in 1980 those drawings would have been, uploaded, digitized, put in a repository that lives and breathes with your asset for the next 30 years. And so now you already have access to it, right? That's where the savings come into play. That's where the time comes into play. And, when you bring that number to life, we also got to be cognizant that this is a change in how people view, their operational budget at the end of the day. And so we have to be cognizant of that, but also be very forthright with, the benefits, not just with me and Knocen, but with valuing, an organization's knowledge management process, right? Not, it's not something that's often taught. It's a great class, that I took when I was going through grad school. But how people manage their knowledge and their information is critical to creating efficient, workflows and processes, that are ultimately going to save resources.
It is, and being an engineer myself, at one point of time, I realized how knowledge management and communication can clash, and miscommunication, and obviously people leaving out that tacit knowledge that lives with them, that institutional knowledge, to use your terminology, that lives with
Yeah.
them is phenomenal. You cannot quantify that, and you only realize the worth and the investment that you put into them, the people that you lead, well, when you start training the new ones out there.
Yeah, there's kind of an analogy that I used to use where it's
It,
like 10% of a workforce are overachievers, right? They do amazing work. Everybody knows them. They have all the answers, right? So that's 10%. 30% of your workforce just does their job and they do it well, but they don't do any more, they don't do any less. And unfortunately, we have about 60% that are underperformers, right? The problem comes is when that one of those 10% leaves, they take so much context, historical information, valuable data with them. And my goal is to not have Knocen replace them, of course, right? But for Knocen to be a tool in which those individuals don't own organizational knowledge, right? The organizational knowledge is owned by the organization, right? But how do we get that out of those phenomenal people so that they're free to make moves and don't feel like they can't leave, but they can do what they need to do, be more effective with their own careers, and are not so over leveraged by the organizations that they're supporting, right? So Knocen is just kind of a tech version of that 10% overachiever. That's kind of what I like to say.
the overachievers leave with the goal of the company, the goal, the institutional knowledge of the company. And in this case, I'm pretty sure that Notion is going to try and solve this. But coming towards the end of our podcast, this has been an inspiring conversation. Never to say less. Marcus loved it. But it essentially revolves around your traits of leadership and your thinking. Okay, I worked in 20 years in the industry, seen this pain point, I validated it, I've got the numbers, now I need to make this change. But amongst all of
Right.
them, what leadership idea would you like to share? This is what, because our audience, most of them are aspiring leaders, what would you like to leave it there as the last wisdom of gold for the podcast, Marcus?
Yeah, I would say like building and figuring out what your foundation is, again, beyond, a spiritual type foundation. I'm not talking about from that perspective. I'm talking about your work foundation, right? And, for me, it was, you know, being optimistic, right? While at the same time being cautious, having incitement, having resilience, right? So once you establish what your foundation will be, because it won't be easy, so you have to have those pillars that you always come back to, right? And then you just go for it, right? That's something that, once I decided to move in this direction, especially with the software, I had the long look in the mirror, and I had to say, am I really doing this? And I had that conversation with probably myself every month, right? But by being excited by what I'm doing, right? By staying resilient, still being cautious because I need to limit my mistakes, right? But always going back to whatever your particular pillars will be that's going to drive you through some not so easy times. So that's the one thing. And then secondly, and this is something I'm still working on,
It.
is that don't be paralyzed by the pursuit of perfection. That is my problem to a T. I probably shouldn't went to market with this product a year ago, right? But it wasn't good enough for me, right? And my friends and my families and my loved ones have said, you're paralyzed by perfection, bro. Just go with it. It's never going to be right. It's always going to be a process. It's always going to be a journey. Enjoy it. Take your lumps, but move forward. So that's the last thing I'll leave people with. Like, go for it, build your foundation of what's going to drive you through these hard times, good times as well. But also don't be paralyzed by a pursuit of perfection. It doesn't solve you or anyone else. Um, it doesn't solve you well. Yeah, you just got to
It
go
is.
for it.
It is a perfection paralysis. Is a plague that founders go through, but they themselves realize that there's nothing called perfection. Just need to keep on iterating on the product until it solves what you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah.
But it has been truly an insightful conversation. Marcus, great getting to know you, great getting to know more about Knocen, excited for Knocen as well. And just before we call it ends, if our audience would like to get in touch with you, know more about Knocen, know about what you guys do, how exactly does it work? Is that a LinkedIn or how?
Yeah, so we're up on all socials. Just Knocen, Knocen. Go to our website, www.knocen.com. At the top left, you'll see all of our handles for our social medias for Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, you name it. And we'll be, uploading this podcast. I'm excited for it. So thank you for that. But also some of our, institutional information, and just as we grow as a business, they'll all be posted there. You can keep up with us there.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen, www.knocen.com for the website. And of course, you can reach out to Marcus on LinkedIn as well, along with the socials. And once the podcast is released, we will be sharing all those social links on our description so that it makes our life easy for the audience. But Marcus, thank you so much. Thank you a lot for being part of the Corn Office podcast. It has been great getting to know about Knocen, especially, and also your ideology of how your corn office is and what it
Yeah.
has been and what it will be for the years to come.
There. Absolutely a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Lovely having you as well. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be with you again with another C-suite wizard and what they're thinking from their corn office. Until then, be safe.